So Leo's back, and he's back because we both watched Get Out, and it both gave us life.
A lot of life.
So much life. Spoilers, by the way, so if you haven't watched it yet, please watch it because it's amazing, and give it all of your money.
All of your money.
Before we get into it, Leo, what was your favorite scene?
Oh, my favorite scene. The guy, like the grandpa came, and then he flashed his phone, and then he faked being under control, and then turned around and just like shot her.
Yeah.
I thought that was like sweet justice. And that was like,
I think my favorite scene was like when the girl when the girl goes like, you know, I can't give them to you, right?
oh, I like low-key saw that coming, but I didn't want to believe it.
Me too.
No, I was like, please be that one
white
like,
girl,
white
come on.
eye. But that's like very intentional in
Yeah.
what, you know, Jordan did with that.
Totally.
So.
I mean like there are so many articles written about it regarding like how she represents white feminism.
Right. White feminism, white like fetishization of black bodies.
Right.
Yeah.
But let's get into like the scene that both of us are here to talk about specifically because we're both Asian.
Yes.
The scene where this one, I believe he's Japanese.
I think so too. Yeah.
Do you remember what his line was?
Oh, he asked the main character, "Oh, do you think it's advantageous to be African American these days?" Which I think is a very direct nod towards affirmative action and how many Asian Americans or just many Asian people in general are very against affirmative action.
Yeah, I was absolutely floored. I did not know that he was going to include one, but I'm glad he did because like for a number of reasons, right? Like there's a plethora of anti-black sentiment within the Asian community.
Yeah.
I've seen it within my own family.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The same for me.
You know, we can go into reasons why that's fucked up because, you know, all people of color have benefited from the strides that black people have made for themselves in terms of voting rights and civil rights. Leo, can you speak more on like the article that Love Life of an Asian Guy wrote?
Yeah, so I actually like had been holding that article because I saw it and I was like, oh, like that one Asian guy in Get Out. But I was like, I can't read this until, you know, after the movie. But literally as soon as I got home, I like pulled up this article. I just had it saved. It was just talking about the term they used was racial triangulation. Mm-hmm. Was that obviously typically we see this binary between like white and black people.
Yes.
And you kind of have Asians situated in a weird spot where
Yes.
we're like privileged in a lot of ways, but we're also used as kind of like a wedge tool. So for like the model minority myth,
wedge tool is great.
Yeah, and that ties into it because if you have a model minority, it means you have not so model minorities. So that's often used as like, hey, Asian people can do it. Why can't you just work hard and like ignore your oppression and do it as well? Which
is absolute bullshit because if you've taken sociology 101 before, then you know that since like the beginning of like suburbia, from what I understand, you know, black people were shortchanged when it came to like living situations.
Absolutely.
And suburbia was designated for white people specifically. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how black people have become associated with the ghetto because they were already placed in starting situations where they were not able to ever reach this ideal of like the white picket fence suburbia.
Yeah.
It's this constant history of the oppressors putting the oppressed in a bad situation, then blaming us for putting ourselves in that bad situation.
Right. It's very important that there's also only one Asian person, that there's not like multiple.
I think so too.
Yeah, because it's like we're still the minority and we still don't have
full rights
and like full power in that situation. With, like, I feel like it's implied that that Asian person is still very much subject to like the social power and the influences of like all the white people.
Right. I think the article also mentioned that I think it was very intentional that this man asked a question as opposed to like saying something like black is the new thing now, right?
Interesting. I didn't think about that.
Because I think like I believe the article also mentioned that like he asked a question because he's still figuring out his place within that because he's equally as confused as like where he stands with those things, even though he is enjoying his privilege. Right.
It was a really snarky comment. I thought it wasn't just like, oh, is African American like an advantage?
Interesting.
It's like I feel like it was a very pointed like barbed question.
Oh really?
Like I felt like it was very intentional that at least in his mind it was like I feel like being African American
is great,
is an advantage, but I'm just gonna ask it to you in this kind of passive aggressive way. Yeah.
I didn't
two chains of thought there, but
I didn't quite pick that up. Yeah. But I I think that's what's great about the line, though, is that it can be interpreted in multiple ways, because both of them, I think, are valid. What is your take on, like, how we got here, and why is there such a divide now between, like, I'm sure you have seen them and I've seen them, like, there's like a lot of Asian American people who don't consider social issues or social justice part of their DNA.
We've had a steady stream of Asian American immigrants. It's not like we all came over in this huge bunch in like
in a boat
in like 1965, and it
all
just,
chained together.
Yeah, it's like since the Immigration Act, and we just have all been in America for like generations since. But it's because there's like that large gap of the Chinese Exclusion Act that so many Asian American immigrants are recent immigrants. Like I'm second generation.
Right, and I think that also speaks to the idea of a few years ago it's been tackled, and it's still being tackled now, where like we should not identify slaves as immigrants and not include them in the immigration, because I think have you seen those discussions before? I
think Ben Carson said something outrageous about it. Yeah.
And like how, like, you know, most of us were able to come here of our own volition. And so that immediately gives us like some form of privilege and a level of comfort with with America as a system, I guess.
Yeah, it was actually that was like around Cold War era. So there was pressure on the US to open their gates for globalization and such. But it was also kind of the arms race. So America was looking for talent from all over the world to come to the States. So that's why in the Immigration Act, one of the stipulations is that if you're like a doctor, or if you're like a high earning professional, or like basically of some use to the US like military, or to the US like science and technology programs, that you were, put forward in the list to be able to get into the States.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would definitely cite that as one of the roots of the model minority.
Totally. Yeah. I think like just because of like the way that we have been brought in in comparison, not just Black Americans, but also Latino Americans and Native Americans, the way that we came in was much more privileged than anyone else, right?
Yeah.
I would also say that like that's just what privilege does to you, right? Like it kind of like puts you to sleep. I think privilege just inadvertently blinds you to a lot of injustices.
Right.
Because I see that happen a lot with white gay people, a lot. Like
yeah, and it's also this weird thing where I feel like I'm privileged to be woke in a sense, because I feel like for Asians, like it's more of the default to not be woke, especially for East Asians. Totally. I will say, especially like East Asians that come from like a middle to like upper middle class background.
Yeah. What would you want to say to, I guess, our specifically East Asian brothers and sisters regarding like what should we be working on, and like how, like what kind of resources should we be like tapping into in order to like help us with this ingrained anti-Black sentiment?
I think it's a lot of learning the history. Like obviously before I learned the history, I don't have any context. Like if someone just told me, hey, you and your family should stop like hating Black people, I'd be like, well, yeah, that sounds like a bad thing, but I don't know the context behind it and how historically rooted and bad it really is.
I think it would be very helpful to like actually listen in on media that is marketed and specifically made by Black people for Black people.
Right.
Because I think I said this in my TED Talk. I think that it's a privilege to be able to listen in on these conversations that we normally would not be welcomed in and would not have a place in.
I think the core of it is listening to Black stories, whether it be through blogs, through vlogs, through podcasts, whatever medium you can, because we live in the age of the internet. It's very accessible. But I think through learning about their stories and then their narratives in terms of like white oppressors, we can see how our actions and our family's actions serve to perpetuate that. And maybe even before that, because I know that might be kind of a jump for some people, or like at least for me, what happened was I learned about Asian American history first. I learned, wow, like, there's a system that doesn't treat people like me so well historically and currently. And then once I learned about that, when I learned about, Black oppression, I was like, okay, well, I already know that this system exists. It helped me to empathize and give more like credence to those stories.
That's a great point. Yeah, like learning about our personal history with oppression, being able to understand that like this large white favoring system, like it affects us in different ways. Eventually being able to learn about both of our histories, we're able to see like the insidious way that they attempt to divide people of color
and literally pit us against each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like that's literally what they're doing when they call us the model minority. We're not sponsored by Get Out. We just saying it because it's a great movie. And
So
be patient with yourself when it comes to learning and unlearning about things, because we're all learning as people that come from families of immigrants. I'm gonna say that the foundation of this week is going to be the National Immigration Law Center. Cool. Thank you, everybody. See you later.